I want to talk about the list. You know how it is. When I get listy, I start listing things. And I got to thinking as I was preparing for the show that, in the offseason, things happen in waves. The first wave is free agency. Well, really, the first wave is our coaches getting fired and hired. So that's the first wave of the offseason. The second wave are players changing teams, free agency. So after that wave, we then hit the third wave, which is the draft. And so that's a long process. And as you get past that last wave, then you get into the OTAs and the mini camps and that dead period where there is no action really. And then you get to training camp in July. So there is so much time between that second period and really the first as well. But that second period where we got free agency in March to July, which is where we are right now. And so much time has elapsed. So many things have transpired that it's easy to forget. Well, where did some of these guys go? What's the impact going to be of some of these players changing teams? This has been a helter-skelter off season where we've seen some big name players change teams and some other big name players threaten to change teams. So with all of that said, I said, man, I'm feeling listy. I want to make a list of the most impactful new faces in new places. And so, when I make a list, it's comprised of 7 items. This is no different. So I'm going to give you my top 7 most impactful new faces in new places. Before I get to my list, however, I want to give you my honorable mentions. The teams and the players that have changed teams that I think are going to have an impact that just missed making my list. So we start with the New England Patriots and a quartet of players that I think are going to help change the way their offense looks. The reason they didn't make my list is a reason that another group of players didn't make this list for me, and I'll explain here in a second. But Hunter Henry, tight end from the Chargers, Jonnu Smith, tight end from the Titans, wide receiver Nelson Aguilar from the Vegas Raiders, and Kendrick Bourne, wide receiver from the San Francisco 49ers. All 4 of those guys were signed by the New England Patriots this offseason. One of the biggest complaints I had about the Patriots offense last year, outside of the quarterback position, which was a mess, an abject disaster a season ago after the first 4 or 5 weeks of the season when Cam Newton was piping hot to start. And you could say that his downfall of his season coincided with him getting COVID and missing time. Whatever the case may be, the quarterback position wasn't great last year. But you know what else wasn't great? The targets that the quarterbacks, whomever was in the lineup, whether it was Billy Ho, Jarrett Stidham, or Cam Newton, the quarterbacks weren't very, the targets that the quarterbacks were throwing to weren't very good either. And so they went out and they upgraded the tight end position, gave it an overhaul. They went out and upgraded the wide receiver position, added some guys to the mix there. And I think it's going to have an impact. But the reason they don't make the list is because it's still the same trigger man. For all of the issues that we felt like they had offensively last year, a lot of it being the targets, I didn't think the trigger men were that good in New England. Now, they do have Mac Jones. They did add him to the mix. But the assumption is Cam Newton's going to get the first crack at it, and we'll see how he does with all of these new weapons. I just don't love the trigger man. So we'll see what happens in New England. But those guys are going to make an impact. Those are new faces in a new place, and I think they will have an impact. They were close to making this list. They were the first guys off the list. All right, they're the first ones outside of my list. The next honorable mention are the New York Giants with 2 players in particular on the offensive side of football. Keep in mind, they made some moves on the defensive side as well, specifically in that secondary. However, Kenny Golladay, wide receiver out of Detroit, and tight end Kyle Rudolph are 2 guys that I think are going to come in and have an impact on that offense. But because of the same thing in New England, I kind of pushed them down the list a bit. And they got the same trigger man in Daniel Jones. I don't know if I feel good about Daniel Jones as a quarterback or not. I think he can play and get it done, but I have my reservations about Daniel Jones in the pocket as a passer. And so I don't know if upgrading the targets is necessarily going to help him or not. You would like to think that it would, but you never know. I always feel like this, and Washington fans have been screaming this for a while with Terry McLaurin in particular. There is a bit of bottlenecking that does go on with receivers when you don't have a dude at quarterback, when you don't have that guy at quarterback. There is a bit of bottlenecking that happens. There's only so much you can do when you don't have a consistent threat at the quarterback position. Same thing could be said for receivers, although I kind of feel like the bottlenecking isn't as significant with receivers. If you, or excuse me, the other way around. If you're a quarterback and you're good, I don't think the bottlenecking is as significant, okay? For instance, Aaron Rodgers for years, the Packers haven't drafted a first-round wide receiver, and I'm not saying you have to draft a first-round receiver to get results at the receiver position. However, it helps when you draft first-round talent. They've just given him Devontae Adams and a bunch of, mid to late round draft choices and undrafted guys for that matter, and said make it work. And he's been able to. Why? Because he's one of the best in the game. Patrick Mahomes has talent around him. Don't get me wrong. But I think we're really going to find out a lot about Mahomes this upcoming season. And what we're going to find is that he can take, table scraps and turn it into a 4-course meal. Okay? Because he doesn't have a lot at receiver. When you look at his group, it's Tyreek Hill, Mecole Hardman, and then it's a bunch of nobodies. Demarcus Robinson isn't a guy that I get excited about. I don't think he's consistent. Watch Mahomes still tear it up and show that I don't have to have this massive supporting, cast of receivers to get it done, because the bottlenecking with the quarterback isn't as significant as it is with receivers, if that makes any sense. With that said, Galladay and Rudolph coming to the Giants, don't know if that changes anything or not for Daniel Jones. We'll find out. It always helps to have more targets to get the football to. It always helps to have more weapons than less. So we'll see what happens there. They just missed out on my list. In Los Angeles with the Chargers, I think it is important to note that for as good as Justin Herbert was last year, he was running for his life more than half of the time he was pressured. Over 60% of the time he was pressured last year. One of the highest among starting quarterbacks in the league that started more than 12 games. That said, they went out and made a conscious decision and effort to upgrade the offensive line. Now, remember, they spent the first-round pick on Rashawn Slater. That's going to help. But they also went out and got one of the better centers in the league in Corey Linsley from Green Bay. They also went out and got Matt Filer, a solid right tackle from the Pittsburgh Steelers. And they also went out and got Oday Aboushi from the Detroit Lions as an interior offensive lineman. So they've gone out and upgraded the offensive line to better help Justin Herbert be able to get comfortable in the pocket. And that's going to do wonders for him if these guys perform at the level that they are capable of performing at. So I think that's significant in Los Angeles with the Chargers, but not significant enough to crack my list. And then finally, J.J. Watt and A.J. Green in Arizona. Two veterans looking to win late in their careers, getting an opportunity to go to the House of the Rising Sun in Arizona. The real question and the reason they didn't make the list is because I don't know how much either of these guys have left in the tank. J.J. Watt's coming off of a season in which he had 5 sacks. And sacks aren't everything. I am aware of this. I'm one of those guys that preaches that. As a matter of fact, one of the guys that's on the list isn't a sack machine. But he has an impact on the game when he's healthy. But J.J. Watt's biggest impact is usually sacks and batted balls. And that's how he's able to impact the game. if he's not getting to the quarterback, I don't know how much of an impact he's truly going to have. We'll see. They got to also worry about Chandler Jones, who's not necessarily happy out there with his contract in Arizona. They need to figure that out as well, because part of the reason they bought J.J. Watt in was to pair him with Chandler Jones. If there's no Chandler Jones, then J.J. Watt is simply back in Houston, just in a different jersey, because he was the only guy on that defensive line that teams had to worry about. He'll be the same thing in Arizona if there is no Chandler Jones. So they really need to figure that situation out. But A.J. Green didn't look like himself last year. That's understandable. Here's a guy that hadn't played football in what felt like 2 years almost. And so obviously there was going to be some rust. There was going to be, sort of a feeling out period for him to get back into the swing of things. Is that the case? Did he need time to get back into the swing of things? Or is Father Time tapping him on the shoulder and saying, hey, come on, time for you to come with me? I think it's the former, not the latter. I think you're going to see a resurgence in A.J. Green. I don't think his best football is gone quite yet. So I think those guys could have an impact, but it's debatable. We will see. They didn't make the list either. So now let's get to the 7 teams and subsequent players that did make my list of most impactful new faces in new places. So we start with number 7 on my list, and that is Jadeveon Clowney and John Johnson III in Cleveland. Those two guys, to me, are impactful players on a playoff team from a year ago that really needs a boost defensively. The Browns offensively last year were good enough to probably make a run at the Super Bowl with the way they could run it. And Baker Mayfield was playing, with some of the injuries to Odell Beckham Jr. and some of the guys that they had, in and out of the lineup like David Njoku. They still were able to perform at a high level, and he was able to get the football to other guys, utilizing some of the young tight ends on the roster and some of the other wide receivers. Donovan Peoples-Jones stepped up in some critical spots last year, as well as Rashard Higgins. But when you look at what they were able to do offensively, their run game was the catalyst for everything that they did, and they were damn good on the ground with Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb. That said, for as good as they were on offense at times, they were equally as bad on defense. There were some shootout games where the offense had to go above and beyond the call of duty because the defense simply wasn't good enough to hold on to what was a momentous lead. You think about the Cowboys game. They are stomping a mud hole in the Dallas Cowboys and needed, I think the Cowboys scored 28 unanswered points in the fourth quarter to take what was a 31-point lead and cut it to like 3 before Odell Beckham Jr. slammed the door shut with a reverse late in the game to put the Cowboys away. You think about the Thursday night game in that duel that Baker Mayfield had with Joe Burrow. Remember, Burrow threw the football like 30 some odd times in the first half, ultimately left that game, I think, with 62 or 3 passing attempts in that game. And they had to hold the Cincinnati Bengals off 34-30 or something like that in the shootout. I think about the other game against Cincinnati where they're trailing late after Burrow takes them down the field late in the ball game, scores a touchdown. Mayfield has to then rally them with a series of unbelievable throws to get them into the end zone. I think he ultimately hits Donovan Peoples-Jones on a beautiful throw into the end zone for about a 35-yard touchdown to win them that game in a come from behind fashion. And then you think about the Ravens game, which was probably the most epic game of the season, regular season wise, all season long. Monday night game, the Ravens and the Browns are going toe to toe, AFC North battle. The Ravens have to have this. They cannot afford to lose. They lose this game, they're probably not going to make the postseason. Lamar Jackson gets hurt. The Browns seem to be in control of the game, and they can't stop the Ravens offensively from scoring. Lamar leaves. They start to get some stops. They take the lead. They look like they're going to win. Lamar comes back. They can't get a fourth down stop. I think that score ended up being something like 45-42 or some nonsense like that, 47-42, whatever the case may be. their defense, I said all that to say this, their defense wasn't good enough last year. For all the leads that their offense tried to give them, the defense tried to piss them away a lot of times. And so, I mean, think about the playoff game. They jumped the Steelers, and the defense was hugely responsible for some of the points being scored early in that ball game. They jumped the Steelers, and the Steelers were roaring back in that game. Okay, so this defense needed an upgrade. Jadeveon Clowney, opposite of Myles Garrett, is exactly what the doctor ordered. If he can stay healthy, the Titans are saying, hey, you go ahead, have fun with that. He didn't do a damn thing for us. And John Johnson is one of the most underrated safeties in the league. I talked about him being like number 5 on my top 23 list of free agents that were available this offseason, and he signed with the Browns. John Johnson is a really good football player that not enough people know about. I think those two guys could have a massive impact on what is a very young but up-and-coming Browns defense. They've added other pieces to that mix. They're going to get Grant Delpit back from his season-ending injury last year. Didn't play a snap for the Browns. They're also going to get a bunch of their cornerbacks back healthy. They added Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, and they've added a bunch of pieces. They're a dangerous team, and with Clowney and Johnson in the mix, look out for the Browns potentially being a team that could take a monumental step forward defensively and really be dangerous if that run game continues to be as good as it was a season ago. They come in at number 7. Coming in at number 6, it's not a player, but rather a coach. And coaches don't necessarily win you games. The players on the field are the ones that are ultimately going to have to execute and get it done. But I can't stress this enough. The Dallas Cowboys defensively were an abject disaster last year. One of the worst defenses in the league, and really one of the worst coached units in all of football a season ago. And Mike Nolan, I don't know how this guy continues to get work in the NFL. I just don't understand it. But somehow he was able to coax the Cowboys into making him their defensive coordinator. It did not go well for the Cowboys last season. They replaced him with former Falcons head coach Dan Quinn. And if nothing else, Dan Quinn is going to hold those players accountable, and he's going to simplify the defense. Not going to have them doing a bunch of nonsense. He's going to make things a lot easier for them. Now, they still have to have the horses to get it done, and that remains to be seen. The Cowboys spent a ton of draft capital on the defensive side of the football. I think they had 9 picks in the draft, and like 7 of them were on the defensive side of the football. So they understand that that's where they need the most help. We'll see if those guys come in and are able to contribute. They also brought in some free agent acquisitions. Dan Quinn, very comfortable with some of the guys that they brought in from Atlanta. And so we'll see how it works in Dallas. But to me, number 6 is Dan Quinn coming in as the defensive coordinator of the Dallas Cowboys. Because we know the offense in Dallas is ready to win right now. I'm not 100% sure about Mike McCarthy as a head coach. I'm not a big fan of his. I don't know if he's going to utilize Ezekiel Elliott the way that he needs to be utilized. That said, even if he doesn't utilize Ezekiel Elliott the way that he needs to, there's still just an abundance of talent and riches on the offensive side of the football that they still can't go wrong if they just go out and ball offensively. So the question for Dallas is defensively, can they just slow teams down? They don't have to be dominant. Just slow teams down with the way their offense will be able to move the football and score points. Can they just slow down the opposition enough so they're not in a 38-34 shootout every single week like they were last year to start the season when Dak Prescott was healthy? If they can do that, and I think Dan Quinn will come in and help them do that, they could be a dangerous team. That's why I think Dan Quinn coming over from Atlanta is going to be one of the bigger and more impactful new faces in new places. He checks in at number 6. Number 5 on the list is really intriguing, and I went back and forth here because the guy that he was essentially he swapped out with, he had him in the playoffs last year, and had he decided to come back, I don't know if this trade gets made because he played so well for Indianapolis last year. Obviously, I'm talking about Carson Wentz coming over from Philadelphia in the offseason in a trade to the Indianapolis Colts. is my number 5. New faces in new places. Wentz, to me, if he's healthy, is an upgrade over Phillip Rivers, but he's got to get back to his 2019, 2018, 2017 form if that were to ring true. If he does, they've got one of the better young quarterbacks in football, and then really it's not close. You know, we were talking about Wentz at one point being a potential MVP candidate when the Eagles won the Super Bowl in 2017. He did nothing but lead them to the playoffs, you know, each of the last 3 years essentially, or had a hand in them making the postseason each of the last 3 years, or 3 out of the last 4 years, you know, with last year being the exception to that. But he was the reason they made it to the postseason in 2017 before the injury. 2018, he was playing outstanding football again before he got hurt again. Nicholas Foles took over, and they were one drop pass away from being back in the NFC Championship game again. Wentz had a huge hand in that. They make the postseason the year after that in 2019. He gets hurt in the first quarter of the playoff game at home against the Seattle Seahawks. So this guy, and you look at the ragtag bunch of guys he was throwing the football to in 2019, that might have been his most impressive season, to be honest with you. So if he could get back to that, Indianapolis is going to be in really good shape. I think that's a big move for them, because without Wentz in the mix, the Colts go from a playoff team last year to a team that probably wouldn't even be anywhere near the postseason in 2021. So that's a big one there in Indianapolis with Carson Wentz. I think that's going to be a massive move for them, and he checks in at number 5 on my most impactful faces in new places. Number 4 on my list are 2 players that are going to come in and hopefully help bolster what was an anemic offense a season ago. And I'm talking about wide receiver Curtis Samuel. Never, ever trust a man with 2 first names. And quarterback Ryan Fitzpatrick. Washington's offense last year was near the bottom in almost every statistical category known to mankind a season ago. They were atrocious offensively. I don't know if there were any other teams in the league that didn't score 30 points in any game last season. Now, Washington did score a 40-burger in a game against the Cowboys on Thanksgiving, but outside of that, they didn't score 30 points in any game a season ago. I can't remember a team ever having that happen, but they were so bad offensively at times. It was hard to watch. They went through 4 different quarterbacks. Alex Smith was a stabilizer, but he was not a game changer by any stretch of the imagination. And we already knew that pre-injury, he wasn't a game changer, but more of a game manager. And that's exactly what he was a season ago. With that said, you bring in a guy that is the polar opposite of Alex Smith in Ryan Fitzpatrick, who's going to push the football down the field and give Washington a chance to stretch the field vertically, which is something they failed to do consistently, really at all last season. And then Terry McLaurin, poor Terry, has been out there trudging along by himself at the receiver position since coming into the league in 2019. He's finally going to get a running mate, several, as a matter of fact, as they went out and added, several guys via free agency and the draft. But in particular, Curtis Samuel is the guy that they pegged to be his running mate at the receiver position, a guy that can do a multitude of things and should give this offense some diversity. And so if you're Washington, with the defense that you were able to play a season ago, we're going to see how good that defense is. They're going to be tested this upcoming season with the schedule that they have. With that said, if the defense is anywhere near as good as it was last year, and the offense can improve upon what was one of the worst units in football a season ago, you're thinking those 2 guys coming in are going to help do that. This team is going to have a fighting chance in the NFC East. I think they're going to be hugely responsible for any change in a positive manner in Washington. Those 2 guys, I think, are the number 4 most impactful changes to a roster this offseason. Coming in at number 3, Julio Jones, traded to the Tennessee Titans from the Atlanta Falcons. His trading to Tennessee immediately gives the Titans Super Bowl aspirations, and rarely does that happen with the changing of teams with a receiver. Normally that's reserved for quarterbacks only, but Julio Jones and his impact when healthy is so great that it gives the Titans something that they not necessarily lack because they had Corey Davis. However, Corey Davis isn't Julio Jones. Hell, A.J. Brown isn't Julio Jones. So they have upgraded the wide receiver position. And keep in mind, this is a Titans team that 2 years ago was in the AFC Championship game and last year won their division, hosted a playoff game, and was bounced in Wild Card Weekend. So 2 straight years of making the postseason. They had a 2,000-yard rusher last year in Derrick Henry. So with that kind of run game, play action fake now becomes that much more lethal. You had guys last year that were able to take advantage, but not like Julio Jones. Things are really going to change. You're going to have to defend the Titans differently. You're going to really have to pick your poison because now with Derrick Henry being the dynamic rusher that he is, if you want to stop him, you're going to have to dedicate that 8th defender to the box. And we've seen him and that Titans offensive line and blockers destroy 8 and 9 man fronts. And that's why we see Derrick Henry ripping off these 92 and 95 yard runs because they come up, they try to stop the run. He hits a crease. And as we saw in college, nobody catches this guy from behind, so now if you bring up that extra defender in the box to stop the run, now you got to pick your poison outside because Corey Davis wasn't really a deep threat. Now A.J. Brown can hurt you on one side and Julio Jones can hurt you on the other side. And if you decide, well, don't want to get beat over the top by Julio, we're going to give AJ one-on-one on the other side. Well, good luck with that. If you say, okay, we're going to keep our safeties back, we don't want to get beat. Now Derrick Henry has a light box. So it's going to be tough to defend the Titans. That to me is a massive move for them, and it gives them a chance to really be dominant offensively to go along with the defense that we think is going to improve in the upcoming season. So Julio Jones to the Titans, my number 3 most impactful new faces in new places. We get to number 2 on my list, and it's Orlando Brown, Joe Thuney, and Kyle Long to the Kansas City Chiefs. Think about this for a second. The Chiefs' offensive line was the number 1 reason the Kansas City Chiefs didn't win the Super Bowl last year and go back-to-back for the first time since, 03-04 when the Patriots did it. The reason the Chiefs weren't able to go back-to-back was because their offensive line was in shambles by the time they got to the Super Bowl. The week prior or 2 weeks prior in the AFC Championship game, they had their starting left tackle go down. Their right tackle had already been out, and they were decimated up front. One of their starting guards opted out of the season. They were a mess up front. And the Buccaneers took full advantage. They were shuffling around parts. They took their right tackle, put him at left tackle, and it was a mess. And they got destroyed. Patrick Mahomes was under siege from the word go. And remember, he hurt his toe in the divisional round versus the Browns, so he already wasn't 100%, and then he had to run around and try to save himself. So just upgrading the offensive line and spending the resources that the Chiefs did in the offseason up front is going to upgrade what is already a dynamic offense. If Mahomes has time and they're able to run the football, this offense, look, they're ready to go back to the Super Bowl because they've got the best player in the league in Patrick Mahomes. They're ready to go back to the Super Bowl again. The only thing stopping them is their offensive line. Well, Orlando Brown in a trade with the Ravens, Joe Thuney in free agency from the Patriots, and Kyle Long coming out of retirement. He's already hurt himself, but he's reportedly supposed to be back at some point. All of those guys being added to what is already a talented Chiefs offensive line that'll get, Laurent Duvernay Tardif back, who opted out as a doctor to help with COVID, and Austin Blythe at center. You put all of those guys together, and that's going to be one of the best offensive line units in all of football. And so to me, that's the most impactful because you take an already Super Bowl ready team and you put them in a position to win another Super Bowl by upgrading the one position that really stopped them from winning a Super Bowl a season ago. And then finally, we get to number 1. But before we do, let's recap the list getting to our number 1 spot. Number 7, Jadeveon Clowney and John Johnson III being added to that Cleveland Browns defense. I think that's going to do wonders for the Browns, who last year defensively had issues stopping teams from running up the score. They're going to have a much better defensive unit if they're healthy this season with the addition of Jadeveon Clowney and John Johnson III. Number 6, Dan Quinn, now defensive coordinator in Dallas, is to me one of the biggest offseason moves that the Cowboys could have made. Obviously, signing Dak Prescott was priority number 1, but fixing the defense was not that far behind. If Dak Prescott signing back in Dallas was 1A, fixing the defense was 1B. And the best way to do that, if you're Dallas, is to fix the defensive coordinator, the guy that's coaching those players and putting them in positions to succeed. Dan Quinn's going to come in and give them a bit of stability on the defensive side of the football with the way he's going to call their defense and put some of their players who are talented, contrary to popular belief, in positions to succeed. He comes in at number 6 as the new defensive coordinator in Dallas. Number 5, Carson Wentz to the Indianapolis Colts. They swap out aging veteran Phillip Rivers, who retired in the offseason, for Carson Wentz. They made the postseason. Phillip Rivers was awesome for the Colts last year, so there won't be a significant change unless Wentz reverts back to his 2017 form, where he was well on his way to winning the league MVP before sustaining a late season injury against the Rams on the road. If he can get back to that status, the Indianapolis Colts then ascend as one of the favorites to be in the AFC Championship game. If he just can play at the level that he did in 2018 and 2019, the Colts are going to be back in the postseason and threatening to advance in the postseason. Number 4, Curtis Samuel and Ryan Fitzpatrick to Washington this offseason to help what was one of the worst offensive units in all of football. Terry McLaurin needs a running mate. He gets that in Curtis Samuel. Also, it doesn't hurt that that's his best friend from college. And the Washington football team needed an upgrade at the quarterback position. Don't know if Ryan Fitzpatrick is necessarily an upgrade, but I do know he's going to make things exciting and push the football down the field vertically, something that this team refused to do at the quarterback position a year ago. Number 3, Julio Jones to the Tennessee Titans in a blockbuster trade this offseason that saw the Titans acquire the former All-Pro wide receiver. You add him to the mix with A.J. Brown and a dominant run game featuring a 2,000-yard rusher in Derrick Henry, and things change drastically for the Tennessee Titans. They go from a team that's cute in the AFC South, may win the division, may not win the division, to they're definitely winning that division if they're healthy, and they could make some noise if they get to the postseason. Number 2, Orlando Brown, Joe Thuney, and Kyle Long all helping bolster the offensive line in Kansas City for the Chiefs. The number 1 reason the Chiefs were blown out in the Super Bowl was their inability to protect Patrick Mahomes. Making the moves that they made this offseason, trading for Orlando Brown, signing Joe Thuney to a massive contract, and wooing Kyle Long out of retirement, all go a long way in helping the Chiefs repeat as AFC Conference champions and potentially get that all-elusive Lombardi trophy for the second time in 3 seasons. Finally, we get to my number 1 most impactful: new faces in new places. And to me, without a doubt, it is Matthew Stafford to the Los Angeles Rams, coming over in a blockbuster deal with the Detroit Lions. I was reading an article a couple of days ago in which Kyle Shanahan said he was on vacation in Cabo watching film of Matthew Stafford, and he realized this is the guy that will win us a Super Bowl in San Francisco. I got to get this guy. And they tried like hell, just like Washington did, and several other teams that threw their name in the Matthew Stafford sweepstakes this offseason. But unfortunately, there was no winning against the guy that used to be in L.A. and Brad Holmes, and, you know, the guy that was his mentor in L.A. and Thomas Dimitroff. There was no winning, or Demoff. There was no winning there. All right, Demoff and Brad Holmes were like this. And so there was this this synergy between the two, a working relationship. They had this, Holmes still believes in Jared Goff, so they needed somebody to take Jared Goff off of their hands. No one else was looking to do that. No one else wanted that contract. And so you weren't going to be able to beat the deal that the Lions gave or the Rams gave the Lions. No one was going to be able to beat that deal. That said, Matthew Stafford is the kind of quarterback that if you put him on your team and you're ready to win, it automatically ascends you to Super Bowl status as a team that could win it all in the upcoming season. You put Matthew Stafford on the San Francisco 49ers right now, and they are right there with Tampa Bay as prohibitive favorites in the NFC conference. Because he's not in San Francisco, they're not in that discussion. There are about 2 or 3 other teams that are ahead of them, including a Aaron Rodgers-led Green Bay Packers team when Rodgers decides to show up. This same Rams team that we're talking about with Stafford, and of course the defending Super Bowl champion Tampa Bay Buccaneers. That said, when you look at what Stafford is, a lot of people look at him and say he's a loser, hasn't won in the postseason, this, that, and the third. I just say I look at a guy that is a marksman. I look at a guy that is a sharpshooter at the quarterback position that will shred you if given an opportunity to do so, has been one of the better quarterbacks in the league and just hasn't had a ton of support on the defensive side of football and any consistency with the running game. And they haven't had a ton of targets, even though there have been times, obviously, heavens to Megatron and, Marvin Jones and they had Kenny Galladay. They've had guys, Golden Tate at one point, but they've always lacked that key ingredient, whether it be the run game or it be the defense. They've always lacked something. And you add Matthew Stafford to the mix with this Rams team that is ready to win right now. Sean McVay couldn't get rid of Jared Goff fast enough to get Matthew Stafford. We've heard about how happy he's been this offseason. When asked, is he happy about having Matthew Stafford, he said, damn right I'm happy. Tells you all you need to know. Matthew Stafford, the reason he's number 1 on my list is that he took a team that wasn't going to be in the Super Bowl conversation without him, and with him being added to the roster, they now jump to not necessarily the front of the line, but towards the front of the line. If they're not ahead of Green Bay, they're right there slightly behind them as Super Bowl favorites in the NFC. So Tampa Bay's number 1. No one's leapfrogging them. But with Matthew Stafford and the number 1 rated defense from a season ago in L.A., and no one thinks that's going to change with 2 of the most dominant players in the league at their respective positions on defense, and Aaron Donald, never, ever trust a man with 2 first names, and Jalen Ramsey at the cornerback position. Most people think they're going to do it again defensively. Now you add a guy that's one of the top quarterbacks in the league offensively with the weapons that they already have, and they added Deshaun Jackson to the mix. Even if he only plays in a handful of games, he'll be impactful in those handful of games. Okay? So they've got a ton of weapons out there, and they added a quarterback that now puts them in the discussion of winning a Super Bowl. To me, when you have a guy that moves the needle as much as Matthew Stafford has done for the Los Angeles Rams, that's how you end up number 1 on my most impactful new faces and new places list for the upcoming 2021 NFL season.
LouieTeeNetwork.